I want you to love me like my dog.
Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Spoiled by Beth. Today I have an extra special guest. Hey, Bogart, can you say hello? Bogart, say hi. Yes. This is my sister's dog, Bogart. You may have seen him make a brief appearance in another video of mine. My book is Thunderdog by Michael Hingson. And this is the last book in my September lineup. And yes, it is actually a book about September 11th. And it is a nonfiction account of a blind man's journey to get out of the towers. And so this is his dog, or this is the representation of his dog, Roselle, who helped him get out. And Bogart is my special guest. Yes, buddy. Here. Good boy. Bogart is my special guest because he was actually intended to be a guide dog himself, which is probably one of the reasons that I like him so much, is because he is so well trained. He, unlike Roselle, failed the program. My sister went to the University of Georgia, where they do have a guide dog program, and the college students are allowed to have the dogs for a set amount of time, and they socialize them. And so that is what Cody got to do, was socialize Bogart, and that at a certain point he was sent to New York to finish his training. But as you can tell, he's so friendly. Well, he's not really friendly. He just thinks that I have more treats. Yes, sweet puppy. I don't know how long he's gonna stay because he doesn't like being down here, but I do think he likes the fact that I've been bribing him with treats. Oops, so sorry. Don't tell my sister. Bogart was just too friendly, so Cody got to have him back, and she's been able to keep him. So he has been a part of our family for about 10 years now. I really enjoyed this account because it was a very different look at someone's September 11th story. So Michael Hingson was, I think, on the 78th floor of the North Tower. And if you don't know, the North Tower was the first tower that was hit. And I thought it was just really, really interesting to see a man who couldn't do it on his own. But in that, oh, are you leaving me? Or am I just sitting on you? This isn't really the best chair for him. He doesn't have a lot of room. So I'm not surprised that he didn't last very long. But he might hang around. Anyways, I thought it was really interesting because we have so many accounts, and just in general, books are about seeing people, hearing people. So it was a really interesting variation on a theme. And I really enjoyed how he enlightened me on the plight of the blind person, because there's so many things that I just didn't think were out there, like the prejudices against the handicapped. It was made very apparent that people think that just because he can't see, he's stupid. And your vision has no correlation to your mental capacity. He's actually incredibly smart. He was working on the 78th floor when the plane hit. He and his coworker were like, okay, it's time to go. We see their descent to the bottom. They do make it out. But throughout this book, he intersperses his journey as a blind man. So I really liked this, because not only did it give me a better perspective on a different people group, but it also gave me a better insight into the guide dog program. There's not a whole lot to really talk about in terms of 9/11, but I did like to see his firsthand account. I need to read more of those. It's been a minute since I did. I will say the two things about this book that sometimes caught me off guard were he would give details that, as a blind man, I don't think he could have known or seen, because it's told through the eyes of a blind man, but some of the details were like he was seeing them. It's obvious that somebody told him later. But I wish that, because he didn't write the book, somebody else wrote it for him, so I wished that the writer had somehow included that, because there are a lot of instances where we would have an aside where he would be like, okay, so we're here at this point in time, unbeknownst to us, this is what was happening outside of our building. So obviously things he couldn't have known because he couldn't, like, he was in a stairwell. So I wish that we had been clued into those sorts of moments as well, like all the paper raining down after the towers were hit. he would talk about the paper raining down outside the building when obviously he couldn't see the paper. So I think those would have been moments that would have added to the storytelling. It doesn't seem like the people in the stairwells actually said much, so I can't fictionalize something that didn't actually happen. But if they had been talking about what was going on outside, I would have liked to see it. Or in the aftermath, when he was told about things, or after the plane hit and that's when people saw the paper raining down, could we have included that where people are like, oh my gosh, what's going on outside? Things like that that would have said, obviously I couldn't have seen this, but this is what was happening because this is what other people were telling me they were seeing. And those would have been little details that would have helped to flesh out the actual event, because obviously there are just things that he, from a sensory aspect, wouldn't been privy to, but are important to set the stage for what had happened. The other thing was sometimes the writing was past tense and then sometimes it was present tense, and the book does go between present and past, and then it would have little informative parts, but it was like within the present tense we'd be past, but then would be present, and then we go back to past. I'm not gonna harp on it. It was a good book. It was a well-written book. There were moments where I thought the explanation, the exposition went a little too much in terms of if he is giving us anecdotes about other blind people and their experiences outside the realm of 9/11, there's almost too much. Like when he would talk about the machines and things that the blind community would use or was created to help them get through things. Sometimes I thought it went a little long. There were points where I found myself drifting off, and so I would just skim until something else caught my eye. There we go. My favorite parts were when he would talk about his blindness and about how he got a guide dog. His blindness was caused, he was born in the 50s, and something that would happen is preemie babies would be put in an incubator and they would just pump in pure oxygen, and this would affect the baby's sight. So I think his retina completely detached. So he wasn't born blind, but because of the medicine of the day, he became blinded. But in those days, if there was something wrong with your child, you sent them away. His parents, who were salt of the earth, were like, no, he's our kid. We're gonna keep him here. He grew up in a seeing community. He had to learn how to be blind in a seeing community. And so I thought it was really interesting. He learned how to ride a bike. He did learn how to fly a plane, which was one part that I kind of skipped over because by that point, I'd had enough of all this other stuff and I wanted to see the 9/11 portion of the novel. There were all sorts of things that he could do despite being blind. Like he basically lived by echolocation. So it was really, really impressive. Even his ability to listen, like he had audiobooks. I think that's amazing. Like in the 60s, they would have them on records and he would listen to them. But once more software was developed to enable the blind community to read email or to do things on computers, and it would be talking away, like the speed and rate at which they could listen. It's amazing. I would love to include this sort of perspective in one of my 9/11 books, because that's the purpose of my 9/11 books, is to show the various ways that people were affected. And so I think getting a perspective like this where 9/11, the day, the event, was about seeing. Everything else, the aftermath, was about experience. But for those of us who were not in the towers, even the people who were just on the street, it's all about what you saw. You saw the planes go in, you saw the towers fall. It's all visual. And this guy has no visual. So it was really, really insightful, and I was so excited to read it. Granted, I think my sister gave me this book like 5 years ago, but that is what this channel has been so great about. It's forcing me to read books that I've had and I haven't been able to get to. I thought it was incredible. I touched on this. I thought it was really incredible how prejudiced people were, or are, depending on situation, I guess, towards the blind. They weren't allowed to ride on planes. Taxis don't want them in their car because of the dog. He got kicked off his school bus because even though by law he has this guide animal and he's allowed to be on any public transportation, his school system said, well, our law trumps federal law, so you are kicked off. And it was cool because his dad had an 8th grade education, and it shows that it doesn't matter what education you have, it doesn't necessarily reflect on how intelligent you are. So his dad would go through these law books and he would fight for his son, and it really rubbed off on Michael so that he could fight for himself in the future when he was facing other prejudices, like when airports or flights wouldn't let him have a seat. I enjoyed, because as I said, Bogart got kicked out. I mean, he's what, 10, 11 now, and he would probably be aging out just because the psychological and the physical requirements for a guide dog. And so you see them going down 78 stairs, or flights of stairs. It was like 1,400 steps. They have no water. Eventually it got really cramped, really hot, and that dog, Roselle, she had to be on point. It's really incredible, because I remember when my sister was socializing Bogart and he would have his harness, he would have his vest, and he was working. Like, he would do everything he was supposed to do, and as soon as you took that vest off, he wouldn't listen to a single thing you said. It was time for him to play. And the same was with Roselle, and how she was so focused and she did exactly what she needed to do, because the book opens with her basically having anxiety over a thunderstorm, where we're shown how Roselle is afraid of thunder, yet she's in a tower that gets hit by a plane. It sways to the point that everybody inside thinks that they're gonna fall over. And then she leads him to the bottom of the first tower. No issues. She's not freaking out despite everybody around her. And then she's in conditions that are not suitable for a dog, conditions that she wasn't necessarily trained for. But then it goes back to temperament, and that is why it's so selective with dogs, and how most dogs don't actually make it through to the program because they don't meet requirements. But her ability to get him to the bottom, to get him out of the towers, had some to do with her training, but it mostly had so much to do with her temperament and her ability to stay focused and get him where he needed to be. I was a little thrown because the majority, like 99% of this book, is told from Michael's point of view, and then we get 2 not even full chapters from his wife's point of view. I liked them because it did show us what it was like to be the spouse, because their tower got hit and he called her and he said, I'm fine, we're getting out of the tower. But then she didn't hear from him for like 2 more hours, because even though cell phones weren't incredibly prevalent, it does seem that in this type of working environment, like in the Twin Towers, with the kinds of jobs those people had, a lot of people did have cell phones. Not only were there people in the towers trying to call on their cell phones, but they were also trying to call on landlines, things like that. So he could not get in touch with his wife for 2 hours. So it was nice to see how she essentially woke up to an event that had just happened. And she talks to her husband, but then she has no more communication with him, but she's continuing to field calls from other people, and she's facing the reality of, wow, this is what it's going to be like if he comes home. This is what it's going to be like if he doesn't come home. Her other perspective is really showing, because she's also handicapped, she's in a wheelchair, showing how they are kind of 2 halves of a whole, how they met and things like that. Things that he left out. For me, I would have preferred not really to have either of her inserts, particularly the second one. I think that is something he could have covered, because he did cover quite a bit of his personal life, his upbringing on his own. Maybe if her point of view had been more prevalent, then it wouldn't have felt so strange to pull away, have her talk for a little bit, and then come back. After he escapes, they are getting out of there. The tower comes down, and this is when I'm just like, that poor dog, poor Roselle. I'm getting ahead of myself. The next morning, he wakes up and he's like, I can't even move. And it's simply trying to get down 78 flights of steps at a snail's pace. I can only imagine how she was feeling. But then she gets down. She's probably dehydrated. She's extremely tired. She's hot. Only for them to not be done. He won't let her drink the water because the sprinklers have been going off in the lobby because he's like, I don't know what kind of chemicals are in there, because the jet fuel had seeped down. They could smell it throughout that stairwell. So she can't drink, and then they get out and there's stuff everywhere. There's stuff flying at them, and then the tower falls. And so he's all gunked up and he's got whatever going on, but so does she. Her poor feet, her eyes, her nose. So it was really cool to see how he was like, we're both kind of blind right now, so she has to rely on all of her other senses and guide dog training that she's had. He and his friend eventually do make it to a little refuge, only then to be told like 10 minutes later, everybody in here has to go, because obviously nobody knew the second tower was gonna fall. So the second tower does fall. They were far enough away that it didn't impact them as much. They end up going to a friend of a friend and they stay there for a minute. He finally got home because he lived in New Jersey. So he finally got home around 8 o'clock. From there, we have him telling us how he goes to the doctor, and the doctor is saying, here's all these things you need to do because of whatever toxins, because they're breathing in people, they're breathing in building, and the buildings were from the 70s, so that could have included asbestos. So there's all these dangers coming from the destruction of the building. So he's like, well, what about my dog? And the vet's like, your dog's fine. Dogs bounce back pretty quickly, both emotionally and physically. And he saw that the very next day. So it was cool to see that. But as he has gotten up and he's getting his breakfast together, he realizes he has no office to go back to. There is nothing left on where he used to work. It doesn't mean he doesn't have a job, but he said that the job then got very stressful because in the aftermath, people were not focused. He was in sales. People were not focused on buying. His top clients had more pressing concerns than to buy what his company was selling. So even though they surpassed their quarterly goals, the higher ups were like, oh, you're not doing your job. He ended up quitting, went to California and worked for the same organization that he got his dog. Well, he's had like 5 dogs by this point. From there, he just became a public speaker because a lot of people wanted to know about his experience, particularly as a blind man. And he thought it was cool, and I thought it was cool too, how full circle some of these things went, because he was in Australia at one point talking to this group, and they were like, you know what? We went hiking. And during this hike, our guide admitted to us that he was gonna cancel this because he didn't think a bunch of blind people could do this, until he heard a blind bloke speak about escaping from the towers, and now this is the best experience he's ever had. So it was really cool kind of the impact he could make. I really recommend this. If you like inspirational stories, if you like pets, if you like animals, it's a good book. And if you don't have a lot of experience like I don't with the blind community, it sheds a lot of light, because he's like, it's not a handicap. Why are you treating me any differently? Like when he was going down the stairwell and the firefighters passed them and they were like, oh, well, we're gonna get somebody to take you down. He's like, I don't need you to take me down. I've got my dog. And it wasn't until he was like, and I've got my scene friend, that they're like, okay, fine. Like, okay, we're fine. And so I can see both sides, where the firefighters, they're probably as ignorant as I am or was about capabilities of the blind, and they just want to ensure his safety, just like an elderly woman or someone who is severely burned. They're like, these are people who have some handicaps. But for him, he's like, I'm 50 years old. I've done this my whole life. I don't need you. It was cool to see how offensive he found it. He was gonna board a plane, and he was in line, and all these attendants kept trying to get him to cut the line, and he was like, I don't need to cut the line. Quit treating me any differently. And that was one of his points about the blind community, is that's something he's waiting for, is when somebody be like, oh, why are you any different than anybody else waiting in this line? And it's a very valid point. He is blind, but does that make him any different? If he can get around, Why can't he stand in a line? He made a lot of really good points, and it made me want to read a lot more books by other people groups just to shed some more light on the things that I'm unfamiliar with. The foreword is telling us that Roselle had since died. You get the impression that some of her ailments were effects of 9/11. There was another book that I had been planning to listen to because we all know I do not have time for a paperback novel, which is why I picked this one, because the other one, my computer, my iTunes, I will download CDs, audiobooks, and then they all get grayed out, and then I can't find them. I'm like, where did the tracks go? I can't find them in Finder. So I wasn't able to listen to that book, so I ended up picking this one. That one, I believe, is more about the search and rescue dogs, but I've heard so much about how they died early because just like people, they inhaled toxins and it caused cancers and just had an effect on their physical state. I can't wait to read more about that because we focus so much on the humans and we forget there were dogs there too. Dogs trying to find people buried in the rubble for days upon days, like doing what they could. It was a really good book. It was an excellent alternate take on 9/11. It was couched within the confines of the event, although I do feel like it was more about him as a blind man and having a seeing eye dog than necessarily about getting out, because if you think about it, he walked down 78 flights of steps. There's not a lot involved in that. Not to say that it's unimportant, but you have to figure out other ways to flesh out a story rather than be like, I spent an hour in a stairwell. I can understand why 9/11 and his escape from the tower was overshadowed by who he is as a blind man. Bogart, come here. Bogart, come here. Come here. Come here, buddy. Come here. Come here. Yeah, good puppy. From me and Bogart to you, have a happy day. Bye.